Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle here, and I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm joined by Rachel. Rachel, thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Rachel did incredibly well last year in her HSC. She actually came fifth in legal studies, if I'm getting that right, and sixth in business studies, and got over 99 for her ATAR, right? And you're now doing law and arts at Sydney Uni, so which you're repping the brand there, Sydney Law. Which is awesome. So well done on that.
Thank you.
I'm sure we can learn a lot from you, and I'm keen to actually discuss it. So run us through, like, what was your study process from day dot? Like when you started, you got to term 4, which is really term 1, year 12. What was your mindset going in? What had you learned up to that point, or how are you going to change your approach? But because everyone knows that year 7 to 11 is important, but it's nothing on year 12, right?
Yeah.
And as much as people try to sell it as, year 11 is just as important. And in some ways you could argue that, but at the end of the day, a lot of people really change their tune when it gets to year 12, right? And they suddenly do everything differently and they know this is it. So what was that like for you? Do you remember making any adjustments, and how are you kind of going about it?
Yeah, so honestly, like when I first started, like for the first probably 2 terms, I was like of year 12, I was kind of just more focusing on like building my notes up. So like every week I'd be working on like making my syllabus notes, and that was kind of specific for the assessments I had that term. I wasn't doing as much like broad like HSC study till probably more towards like the last few terms, like trials and then the actual exams.
Okay.
But before that, I was just trying to make sure like that my notes were staying consistent, and obviously working towards those internal assessments did a lot of study and preparation itself. So I was kind of just like focusing on like specific assessments until it got closer to exams.
Okay, that makes sense. And were you someone who, as soon as you got your assessment, started working on it then and there, or did you kind of cut it fine? And you could be honest about it.
It kind of depended. Most of the time I started them pretty early. Not every time though. Like there were some times when it would just kind of, when you have a lot of assessments and things, sometimes things get pushed to the last minute. But yeah, most of the time, or at least if I wasn't actually writing them out, I'd be like mapping out my ideas and like what I kind of wanted to talk about, just so like I didn't lose ideas as they came kind of. But our assessments, like we got them 2 weeks before they were due anyways, and a lot of them were in class. So it wasn't as like, there wasn't heaps of like actual like writing assessments at home, if that makes sense, during year 12.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
And what were some of the strategies you used, if any, for time management? Like, what would you do on a typical day when you went home? Like, what did the after school program look like?
Yeah, so it obviously changed a lot like throughout year 12. At the start, it was kind of just like staying on top of homework, building my notes, working towards specific assessments. But then towards like the actual HSC and trials, I kind of like, I would map out like in the months before trials and HSC, like every day I'd have a specific subject I wanted to focus on. Just because I found that worked better for me, because like I'd rather go like super in depth into a subject in one day than doing like an hour of one subject and an hour of another subject.
Yes, and it reduces the friction as well, right? It's far more efficient to just do one or maybe 2 subjects, right?
Yeah. So I just like had on my whiteboard, like I had the calendar for the whole few months, and I just had like in a color every day what I wanted to study that day. I didn't have like specific hours I studied as much. I more kind of just like had goals that I wanted to get done on that day. And then I gave myself free time when I got those done.
That's great. Actually, let's talk about that, because that's really important, having like kind of a reward system almost. So it's that which operates as a really effective incentive.
Yeah.
So you would set certain goals. It wasn't about time, it was about output, which is really cool to hear, because I think that's a way better way to approach it.
Yeah.
And once you hit those targets, you would then, activate the reward system, and you get the dopamine hit as well. Like you feel satisfied. It's really important to do that, right? So it's not so much like, oh, just work until I go to sleep. It's like work until I get X, Y, and Z done. And then you can go watch a movie, you can go do whatever, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true, but one of my teachers told me like your last hour before you sleep should just be free time, because otherwise you're still going to be thinking about your work and you won't sleep well. So I like found it really important to make sure I had a bit of relaxation, so I was sleeping properly during like all of studying. So yeah, I would definitely and I did set myself a lot of goals, so I would be studying a lot, but like it wasn't like I was aiming to study till a certain time. It was just aiming to get those goals done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. And there is truth to that, I believe. Not that I'm a scientist, but I've listened to a couple of sleep, experts, and they do say that in the hour before, they definitely want to switch off their brain.
Yeah.
You also want to minimize your light exposure. That's another thing as well. Like, we're in a really lit room here, but if it was 8 p.m., 9 p.m. we'd really want to have this dim. We'd want to have minimal exposure to screens. So all those things factor into the sleep quality as well. How long do you think you would sleep in per night on average?
Probably around 8 hours.
8 hours?
I really made sure I was sleeping because I just did not do well when I don't sleep. Some people are amazing and can run on like 4 or 5 hours sleep, but that's not me.
I mean, I always doubt, when people say that, I'm always skeptical because people think they can run off 4 or 5 hours, but in the long term, they've proven you really can't. There's like 0.01% of people who can actually operate, without detriment to their health on 4 hours of sleep. So basically for everyone watching, I mean, if you think you can do 4 hours, you actually can't. Even if you feel fine the next day, it's probably taking a huge toll on your health. And they've shown that time and time again. A really good podcast on that, by the way, Matthew Walker is a guy that you can all watch. And he does an interview with Joe Rogan and a few other guys on podcasts for like hours, and he goes through all of it. Yeah. And it's really good. I think it's really important for, high school students especially to be aware of this, and teachers and parents, because sleep is even more important, or rather the quantity of sleep is even more important when you're younger because you need more of it, right? Really, so I think they say something like 9 hours, 20 minutes is like the optimal, when you're an adolescent. So 8, I mean, you're probably just kind of fine there, but obviously it didn't do too much harm to your results, which is good. So that's really good. So sleep was taken care of. You used to be disciplined with switching off an hour before going to bed. What other kind of features were there of the study program?
Well, it kind of just depended a lot on what subject I was studying for. And that's again what I factored in when I was kind of planning like around what days I'd study what. It was kind of based off of the order of my exams. So like obviously like English was first. So I would study for English like closer to the exams. And just kind of things like that. And then I did standard maths. So I knew I wouldn't need to study that as much. So then, I factored that into my schedule, like that I didn't have as many days for maths. And then because all my subjects apart from maths were very like essay based, so a lot of my study was around like memorizing essay plans and stuff like that rather than essays themselves, like essay plans. And like I had a whiteboard which I used because I liked handwriting stuff out. I found that really helped like to memorize things. So I had a whiteboard and I'd just be writing, like a lot of my study after I finished my notes was just writing out stuff on my whiteboard like over and over.
No, I've heard a few people say that actually, and they've definitely shown that for a lot of people, write in versus type in rather. That's usually the option, right? Writing versus type in is more optimal for remembering things. So that's great. And in terms of the whiteboard, like run us through how you would actually do that. What would that look like?
So if I was studying for like multiple choice or short answer, especially for business because it's very much like syllabus based. So I would literally just take the syllabus and I'd write at the top of my board the dot point and just like everything I could remember about it. And then I'd like cross check it with my notes after that to see if I missed anything, and then I'd rub it all out and do it with the next one pretty much. And then for like modern and legal where I was doing like really hardcore essay plans, I would just like write out the question at the top and then write like paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3. And like as much of like my points and evidence that I could remember. And again, then I'd cross check that and then just keep rubbing it out and doing it again.
Okay, great. No, it sounds like you did have a lot of discipline though in all of this, right? So you stuck to the schedule. You didn't do too much. You didn't burn yourself out. You were even disciplined to do that. Like some people aren't disciplined enough to stop, ironically, right? Where does that come from? Was there an underlying motivation to do really well in the year? Did you have a particular goal?
Yeah, well, I made an ATAR goal of 95, but like I wasn't.
Well, you just crushed it.
Well, I didn't go to like a private school, so like the expectations weren't usually as high. Like or a selective school. So I was kind of like I wasn't aiming as much for a specific ATAR. I was kind of just like wanting like to do something I could be proud of, I guess, in that sense. Like I just wanted to make sure I was coming out of it with no regrets. Like I think that was my main thing. And then also I get a bit competitive sometimes. So like I was kind of driven by like wanting to do well, like compared to my friends and stuff, like wanting, like I think if you surround yourself by people who are all really driven as well, it kind of like you'll just boost yourself up to be really driven. That's what I found anyways. No, that really resonates. I mean, you actually sound very similar to me. Like that's how I was. Healthy competition, right?
Exactly.
Not that you ever want like your friends, I mean, I'm sure some people do, but that's not good if that's the case, but you don't want your friends to do poorly, but there's a healthy competition, and as you say, you really do bring yourselves up when you do have that competitiveness there. And I think that's a really helpful thing. So did you intentionally like seek out people to like form study groups with, or did it just so happen that you were already friends with people who were similarly driven?
Yeah, well, it's kind of because I guess you become closer with the people in your classes, and then from that it kind of like you can study with them. But I honestly wasn't really huge on study groups in general. I just found I studied better just alone, like when I could just super like zone in on it. But I did like study pairs, like just with one other person.
Okay.
And I feel like that was much more easy to manage and like not get distracted. And we'd kind of do similar to like the whiteboard thing, but like we'd go into an empty classroom and just do it like on all the whiteboards around, like just on a larger scale.
Yes.
And then like cross check with each other and then cross check with our notes after all that. So yeah, I think like I wasn't a big group study person, but I did like kind of things with my friends if I could like trust that they wouldn't get distracted really.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So were you someone who could be kind of more self-motivated? Like when there was the lockdowns and you were studying at home, that didn't affect you too much, or you did still find that hard to concentrate and study?
Yeah, it definitely did get hard at times, especially because our trials and like the HSC itself got pushed back so much. And by the end of it, like just communally, everyone was kind of over it. But then I think in like after trials finished, in that like month or two between trials and HSC, I feel like that's when it really kicked in for me, and I really just got into kind of the zone and got into my schedule, and I managed to stay motivated. But there definitely was, especially in the lead up to trials, it was really hard to stay motivated.
What about let's talk about business studies and we can go into legal studies as well. Maybe we'll start with legal. But legal studies, you came 5th.
Yeah.
So you obviously went incredibly well.
Thank you.
What were the secrets there? What advice would you give to people? Let's start, high level, give some general tips and strategies. What were the most important things for you, do you think, in getting you to that result?
So for legal specifically, I think it's very much like the exam is structured into different sections, and like different parts of the syllabus will only come into those sections. So I think it's super important to make sure that you're studying like for the outcome in the actual exam. Because like for the options things, which like family and consumer and those kind of topics, they're only going to come up in an essay. So there's really no point like wasting your time trying to memorize syllabus notes for them. Like it's much better to just use your time memorizing essay plans for those things. So I definitely think that using the syllabus as it's like kind of intended and in the way it translates into an exam is super important. And for legal specifically, like I think one of the most important things I found was just like to be as critical as you can. Like it's so important when you're because legal is all about making judgments in the HSC. Like you need to be always making a judgment on something. And it's super important to have like both positives and negatives. And if that's not balanced, I would say like even go heavier on negative, if anything. Because I found that like it's very easy for people to just be saying, oh yeah, everything in the legal system is working well. And that's what a lot of like high band 5 people tend to fall into. But I think it really differentiates you. Like the more you can like find nuance and like criticize things, I found that that's really good. And then also with legal, I think using like contemporary examples, anything you see in the news or anything, a lot of it will fall into like legal studies, which is why it's kind of unique in that way. And I think using like real world examples rather than just the ones in the textbook, I think it's a really good way to like differentiate and show you kind of like understand how it applies to the real world, I guess. Like I brought in COVID into like all of my things, which is so random, but if you can find like little places to bring in like modern things, I think it's really good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome advice.
Yeah.
Do you remember any examples of where you were able to use COVID?
Yeah, so I actually used it in all 3 of my essays. I like really exploited it. So for crime, I talked about it in police powers and like how in COVID they kind of increased police powers, and then that kind of showed some of the problems with the current police power legislation. And then for family, kind of similarly, I talked about how domestic violence rates rose a lot during COVID. And then that kind of, again, shows that, the laws aren't actually being that effective. And then in consumer, which was my other essay, I brought in the Lorna Jane case, which was just like this activewear company that had false advertising for saying they could prevent COVID. So yeah, just like little random places to bring it in. I think it definitely just like shows that you understand how things actually apply.
Yeah, and that's critical, right? Like you've said 2 really important things. One is to show the market that you can think critically, i.e. focus on the negatives and actually be cynical about the law, right? Or skeptical, I should say, right? Not so much cynical, but be skeptical and think, look, are these laws perfect? And you kind of should lean towards no, and how aren't they? Just assume they're not perfect because of course it's very hard to have a perfect law. You need to think about the downsides. That was the first thing you brought up. And the second thing, of course, is the application using contemporary examples. So I think they're two really good ones. Yeah. Is there anything else you think you did that helped you stand out?
I mean, I think for like multiple choice and short answer, I just did a lot of practice, like a lot of practice. For essays, it was a bit different because I kind of just like, I had my essay plans and I was just focusing on memorizing them. But then with like human rights and crime, the short answer and multiple choice, I was just doing as many papers as I could. And I think it's impossible to memorize the entire legal syllabus because there's so many like little dot points and things. Especially for like multiple choice, people always ask me like, how can you memorize all of this? Yes. And I think the best thing is to not try to memorize it all, but just like to understand it. And then I think if you understand the content and understand how the legal system works, then you can apply that to questions rather than just like recalling your notes when you're answering them. A big thing is like legal has like on the syllabus these things called themes and challenges, which is like, I think using them as like criteria for effectiveness, like when you're evaluating the effectiveness of something, if you can say like, oh, it fails to meet this theme and challenge, like not in those words, but just bringing in a theme and challenge. That's a good way to kind of just link things together nicely and like succinctly. And that's another point, like in both legal and business, you have to be really like economic with your words because it's not like English where it's like you want to make it sound nice or anything. You more just really want to like get to the point as much as possible, I feel.
Right. Okay, that's great. And in terms of answering these different types of questions and let's just talk about the exam paper as a whole, talk about structure. Like what are some structural tips you can give for people watching?
I do essays very basically in legal, to be honest, like just introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and then a conclusion. Yep. And then within each like paragraph it's kind of like appeal paragraph like that. It's pretty much is like you have a topic sentence, then you have your positives, evidence, negatives, evidence, then link back. And I find it with legal, once you find like the structure of an essay, it's pretty much the same for every single essay you're going to write. And that might not be the same for like English or something where there's like a bit of different levels to it. But I think with legal, it's like the structure can be basic enough that you can just keep reinforcing the same thing and it will like always work for you. And then legal doesn't have heaps of short answers. It just has like that human rights section. Yes. But I think the most important thing for that is, again, just like do not waste any words because you don't have like that much space in those. So I think like especially when there's like those 6-7 marker longer human rights responses, you really just only need to be saying like each sentence should be a mark towards the answer, I guess. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's
is that how you thought about it? Like 7 marks, 7 sentences?
Yeah, pretty much. So like if it was 7 marks, I'd have like, it's kind of like a mini essay. That's what I kind of say, except you don't expand on things really. Okay. You kind of just like, you have your thesis statement, then you say like, it does this well, and then bring in an example, and then you say it does this bad, then bring in an example, and then link back. Like there's no space to really like expand on things, I guess. So that's kind of how I did it. And that's how I kind of did business as well. Like I would look at the marks and kind of like associate how many different points I should be making with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. And even with that mini essay there, like were you having one introductory sentence and then spacing down, going into 2 smaller paragraphs?
No.
Okay, so it was all one big paragraph.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just call it a mini essay because that's kind of like it's kind of the same with bringing in a point and then like an example, then negative and an example.
And there's a thesis statement at the top. So basically is that it just doesn't, you save space by not having the paragraph.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can like, it doesn't have to be 1 negative, 1 positive. It's usually like 2 positives, 2 negatives or something. But the point is like, you don't have to explain anything. You really just want to be like making your point in those, I find, because the like describe and explain questions will be earlier in the short answer section. Yeah. Whereas like when it's that longer one, it's going to be like evaluate. So you really just need to be making positive and negative.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's very pragmatic approach, I would say, right?
Yeah.
So you've talked about the longer ones, three bodies. In those introductions, how long would they typically be and what were you trying to do in the intro?
Yeah, so my intro and conclusion, I just kept super short. Some people are different. Some people like to kind of put a bit more detail into theirs, but I found that for myself, I really just like, I would have like my thesis statement, I'd briefly like explain what I'm going to be saying, and then I'll just say my judgment. And then that's pretty much it. There's no specific count, but usually like 150 words, like 150 to 200 for an intro or conclusion. But again, it works differently for different people, but I just found that I like to put more focus on my actual paragraphs themselves. And then like do intros and conclusions like as succinct as you can to still like do what you need to do, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, even 150 to 200 sounds quite a lot to me,
Really?
right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
look, 150, 200, but I imagine the conclusion would be a bit shorter, right? It's just wrapping up.
Probably,
Would it be 2 to 3 sentences, or would it be longer than that?
No, yeah. And like the 150 to 200 isn't like actually like is always that.
Yeah.
It's usually around like an intro would be like 3 to 4 paragraphs, and then sentences.
Yep.
And then a conclusion would be like 2 to 3 sentences.
Got it.
Yeah.
And what about the other sections? What about even like multiple choice? Did you have a special kind of routine with that? Like some people do elimination, or was there a way? Did you do that first? Did you do the paper in order?
Yes, I'm a big supporter of doing the paper in order.
Okay.
A lot of people aren't, but I just find like usually the paper's structured in a way that the kind of like the longer responses will be at the end, and that means like because the amount of time you take for like multiple choice and short answer is probably going to be the same either way. So I'd rather get those done and then like know if I have spare time I can put that into writing a like nicer essay, I guess.
Yep.
That's just how I think of it. So yeah, I did multiple choice first. I used elimination where I wasn't sure on it. But I would definitely say try to be fast with multiple choice, because I think especially for legal, like if you actually break it down like marks to minutes, like the crime essay you're only supposed to have like 30 minutes for.
Yep.
But like that's crazy. Like no one can write a really good crime essay in 30 minutes.
Sure.
So usually like I would try to like finish multiple choice and short answer faster and then put longer into my essays. So yeah, I used process of elimination where I wasn't sure. But again, like I just, in my studying, I just did like paper upon paper upon paper of multiple choice. And if I didn't feel like studying, like to get me into the mindset, I would like start with multiple choice.
Okay.
It's just like easy, I
Yeah,
guess,
that's
to
true.
just get you into it.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I think the only way that really worked for me studying multiple choice is just to practice it as much as you can. And then you kind of get used to like what kind of questions they'll ask and things like that.
Okay, so what about, you mentioned you did a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So how many papers do you think you did before the HSC and then trials as well? If you remember.
So I didn't do that many like actual like timed full papers at once. I did a few, like probably 2 or 3 for each subject. But I more just like would take sections, and like when I was focusing on that section, I'd just take sections from different papers. And that's kind of like, I did it kind of like I studied by topic kind of. So then I would like seek out different short answers that related to the topic I was like talking about more than like doing entire papers. But then yeah, for multiple choice, just anything I could find, I would do it and just like look at the answers as much as I could. But yeah, then same for business. I only did a few like full actual like 3-hour papers, like sat down. But I do think it's important to do that at least once, like to kind of get an idea of your timing and things. But apart from that, I just more focused on like finding questions that related to like the topic I was studying at that time.
No, that's awesome advice. And any other advice in terms of approaching the legal studies course before we push on to business?
I think, like, I'll just reiterate, I think being critical is just the most important thing in legal. And I think once you like figure out like, and a lot of the legal HSC, like the actual exam, a lot of the marks are for essays, which is why I kind of emphasize essays a lot. But like that also doesn't mean like to forget about short answer and multiple choice, because they're still like super important. And I think just like as much as you can, just try to, if you're ever stuck, just like think, because you can apply common sense to legal a bit, like not as much as business probably, but to a certain extent, like especially multiple choice, like a lot of the answers won't make sense. So just like take a breath and just think about it, and like they will try to trick you sometimes, but they're not always trying to trick you.
Yeah.
Like if an answer seems dumb, it might just be because it's dumb.
Oh, good point. And let's quickly go over to business, because you also crushed that one. So what were your kind of key strategies there? Was it much the same? Like, why don't we talk about the differences? What's the difference between studying legal and business? Because a lot of people do that combination.
Yeah.
So I didn't have essay plans for business. And that was just because like looking through past papers and stuff, I found that like the different directions they could take essays was like much like further, because it's not like the specific parts of the syllabus that could be essays like in legal. It's literally just like they could ask any essay, like there's no real limitation on it. And also like they could ask much more specific things in business, I found. Like they could ask on specific strategies or like specific influences. So I just didn't think that I could handle like making that many essay plans like for every possible scenario. So I'm more focused really for business on like the syllabus, whereas in legal I was more like studying for sections, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, so then, but for business, it was more just in general, like trying to make sure I understood like the entire syllabus and like how different things linked in together. And a lot of my study for business focused on that. So like I would like annotate all over the syllabus and stuff with like acronyms and things, because I think business is a lot like about remembering like what falls onto different parts of the syllabus. Because once you kind of remember it, it's very easy, I find, in business to like talk about it. But it's like actually remembering what they're asking you about seems to usually be the harder part in business, I find anyways. So yeah, my study was very different for the two, definitely.
Right, but did you do as many past papers when it got to the the HSE time?
Yeah.
How were you approaching those few weeks?
It was kind of unique for business because it was my last exam. So I had like a 5-day slot where the only thing I had was business. So I kind of didn't study much for it, like in the lead up to my HSE week. So I was like, okay, I have that 5 days just for business. So yeah, then after that, I just went super like hardcore into like practice papers. But again, like I would do much more multiple choice and like short answer than like full kind of papers. And then when I was doing those full papers, I would just write out like the plans for the essays. Like I wouldn't like write out an entire essay because I just didn't think it was worth my time like at that point when it was that close to exams. Because I was like, I know I can write out an essay. It was more just about like making sure I knew what points could like go into different questions and stuff like that. So yeah, I did a lot of short answer and multiple choice for business though, definitely.
Tell me about the business report, because let's go through the report structure, and then I want to ask you about how to use case studies as well.
So the main thing for business reports, I feel like that like I've seen so many different structures and I think they all work. Like I don't think there's a specific like structure. I just think in general the way they ask business reports is like, because it's usually like kind of 3 questions in a business report, and it's pretty much always like how much you should be writing should be going in ascending order, because it's probably going to be like the shortest, then like the middle, then the longest section. So I definitely think keep that in mind, because again, business I found is like one of those subjects, it's very easy to write a lot. Like there's always so much to say. So I think you really have to, when you're writing a business report, like keep in mind like your direction and like how much time you want, because usually that last bit will be like the recommend bit. And that's usually like where most of the marks come into, I think. So I would definitely say like just be super cautious of like what direction you're going in to make sure you're timing things properly. As for like actually writing the report, I think probably for business reports, the most important thing is to be linking it to the actual scenario that they give you, because they'll give you like a specific business scenario and you kind of have to be writing like about content but in relation to that business. And I find that a lot of the time people will just like write out a paragraph and like write the whole thing just from syllabus knowledge and then link in the business at the end. But I found it was always much more useful to just like shape the entire thing around the business itself, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So like my teacher told me like you should literally be pretending you're writing it to the manager of the business, and like every point you make you should be linking it back to why like the manager should care about what you're saying, like why it actually applies to that business. And that's another thing I did in business reports a lot. Like when I made a point, I'd kind of try to link it back to like overall business success. So like if I was saying like this strategy would help your business do this, I wouldn't just leave it there. I would say, and this is important because this will help the business do this in the long term, if that kind of makes sense. I think with business reports, you can really make it like as like kind of helpful to the business as possible and like practical in that sense, even though it's like a hypothetical business. If you kind of just assume that you're actually like helping a real business, I think it'll help you shape it properly towards that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. And in terms of the case studies generally as well, people say, it's okay to make up things occasionally because it's more about showing you can just apply it to the right thing. Do you agree with that position, or how did you go about case studies more generally?
I would use case studies a bit more sparingly than some people. Like I would definitely use them, but I would only use them in the sense to support the point I was already making, rather than like the actual focal point of the point itself, if that kind of makes sense. Because I see a lot of people like will write out an entire thing based off of something a business did, but I find that's more for the business report. I feel like in the business essay, that like I feel like they want you to just more like show your knowledge and then like use a case study to support that, if that makes sense. So looking at it like that, like I don't know if I did make up case studies. Like I think I always had like real case studies, but I just wasn't super stressed about like knowing the exact numbers and like in statistics and things like that. Like if it's off by like a bit, like I don't think anyone really cares that much. Because I think it is, like you were saying, just more about really showing like your like understanding and then backing it up, rather than like writing a whole thing about like McDonald's or something.
Yeah, that's right. Knowing what could be an example, even if you don't have the number right. It's like, did you at least, if that was the number, did you apply it the right way?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I found. So while I don't think I made up actual like businesses or anything, I definitely think like some of my statistics and things were probably off, but you know, I think that's okay.
Yeah, but that's important. So you definitely used it more as a secondary thing. It wasn't the focus, but it was important to have it threaded throughout.
Definitely. And again, I think it comes down a lot to how schools teach. Different schools teach this kind of differently. And like I was saying, I have definitely seen some people where they're kind of taught to make, like, for example, McDonald's, because that's like one of the ones we're taught. Like they'll be taught to like shape their whole paragraphs around McDonald's. Whereas what I found worked for me is I would just be answering the question itself and then like use it kind of like legal as evidence to support my point rather than the actual point.
Oh, that's great. That makes perfect sense. In terms of the rest of the exam or the subject, whether it's to do with preparation, any final tips on that?
Yeah. So for business, I would definitely just say like know the syllabus as much as you can. Like I think for legal, you can kind of get off with not knowing everything because like, I don't know, like things are just, you can kind of work out what's going to come up in different parts and you can kind of plan for it a bit more. But because business is like, first of all, such a big syllabus, and second of all, like any part of it could come up in any part of the exam. I think it's super important to just be on top of it. But again, like I don't think you need to worry about like memorizing like every little specific thing. It's more just like knowing what comes under each syllabus dot point, I feel like.
Yes.
And that's where I use like acronyms a lot and stuff. And like I would print out like syllabus pages for business and just like write all over it, like everything that I thought came under that point. And I think that's super important. And then for business as well, I think where a lot of people go wrong is because I keep saying like you can write so much for business. Like it's just like such a broad kind of subject. And it's very easy to kind of just regurgitate a lot of the syllabus. But I think it's super important to like be aware of what they're asking you to do, because most of the time in like essays or something, they are going to be asking you to make a judgment. So like you should like leave that like explanation and like syllabus knowledge like to the bare minimum kind of.
Yes.
To just like really get into your actual like evidence and like evaluation more, I feel like.
Great. No, that's fantastic. And I think you've said some really useful stuff on both those subjects. Any departing words for the viewers out there?
I would just say in HSC in general, like don't feel bad to just like take time for yourself and just stop studying because I definitely like, I know a lot of my friends, like they would get super stressed if they didn't feel like they were maximizing their time and all of that. But I truly find that like it's so much better and just healthier if you can also be like finding time to like see your friends and like go out and get food or something, like just little things. I think those definitely like saved me a lot. And I also think it's good to have goals to work through towards throughout the whole year. Like I was saying, I didn't really have a specific like ATAR goal or anything. Like I kind of did, but I wasn't too serious about it. But I was more just like, my goal was like to do the best I could, if that made sense. I think you need something to motivate you.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it, like you could just go into it with like the attitude of whatever will happen. But I don't think it will be like as effective as like pushing you towards like really studying if you don't have something to motivate you. And like it doesn't have to be like a specific uni degree or something. It can literally just be like anything, like just something to motivate you, I guess.
Yeah. No, well said. That's a good place to finish. Rachel, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thank you. No, it was great. And for all of you watching, I hope that helped you. I'm sure it did. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy it, and we'll see you in the next video.